Hey there, Dina here. I am the Chief Curator and Head Pain Coach at Pain to Possibilities. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about how chronic pain and anxiety and depression often go hand in hand. Let's dive in. In a survey of adults with anxiety or a mood disorder like depression or bipolar disorder, about half reported experiencing chronic pain. Among individuals with a mood disorder, chronic pain was the most common, reported by about 50%. So anxiety disorders were also common for those with chronic pain disorder at 45%. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of how and why pain and anxiety and depression are so interwoven, there are a couple of things that are important to know up front. Humans are complex, and so therefore pain is extremely complex. Chronic pain is complicated and can be quite messy at times. And it really goes well beyond just the pain you feel and the medicine and the procedures that are often prescribed. In chronic pain, it's important to remember that all things matter. At Pain to Possibilities, we look at a bird's eye view of chronic pain and the chronic pain management. And this means looking at you and your pain experience from many different angles. In other words, we see you as a whole person, not just the pain or where the pain resides. It's important to know that all chronic illness, of which includes persistent pain, is biopsychosocial in nature. Itchy. Which means that pain and chronic illness is always biological, psychological, and social in nature. We cannot separate the mind from the body and vice versa, as they are always connected. And as stated by Dr. Rachel Zoffness, PhD, pain psychologist and educator, chronic pain is the worst of the human experiences. To be clear, we're talking about chronic pain because when it comes to acute pain, the pain you feel is meant to protect you and to promote healing. The pain you feel with chronic pain is a whole other animal and is often confused with the pain you feel with acute pain. So why is it that chronic pain and anxiety and or depression often come hand in hand? Well, today we're going to discuss why this happens and small steps you can take to help mitigate the emotional roller coaster that comes with the chronic pain. But before we dive in, let's start by stating some very important facts. Fact number 1, chronic pain can be very isolating, and isolation is the worst form of punishment experienced by humans. If we were to think about the jail experience, you'll know what I mean. Fact number 2, chronic pain is misunderstood by the masses. From our current medical model to our families, our friends, and even collectively by our chronic pain community. We really have not done a very good job of teaching what chronic pain really truly means. Now, don't get me wrong, our current medical model is really good at acute care, that short-term issues with your tissues. And that is exactly what it's set up for. But what it's not so good at is dealing with the chronic condition. Fact number 3, the stigma of chronic pain and the feelings it sometimes brings about, the feeling of helplessness, hopelessness, of not being capable or not being worthy. Fact number 5, when it comes to chronic pain, as opposed to the acute pain, the pain pathways are spread across the brain and spinal cord. In other words, there is not just one place in the brain for processing pain. It intersects many parts of the brain. It crosses over the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for our thoughts. It crosses over the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive functioning, hence why you feel like you can't get as many things done, or it's hard to stay focused or to be motivated. Pain pathways are also influenced by our limbic system, which is responsible for our emotions. And so this is where it really ties into the whole anxiety depression piece. Fact number 6 to 5 billion. On top of all of that, there's not being heard, the lack of sleep, the pain crashes, grief for the loss of the life you once had, loss of friends, loss of identity, multiple appointments looking for the next best doctor, lack of control over your situation, trauma, fear, strained relationships, not being able to work. The list goes on, and need I say more? So much like the chicken and egg story, what comes first? The pain, then the anxiety or depression? Or is it the other way around? The answer is it goes both ways. Chronic pain intensifies anxiety and depression, and anxiety and depression amplifies chronic pain. One also really important factor to include in this conversation is that, are you ready for it? Chronic pain is both physical and emotional 100% of the time. I want to make sure you heard that. Chronic pain is both physical and emotional 100% of the time. To explain this further, let's take a look at it from the biological, the psychological, and the sociological perspective of chronic pain. First, we talk about the psychological perspective. To understand how chronic pain affects our mood, let's explore what chronic pain does to our psychology. The primary and secondary pain experience. I've heard this chronic pain experience sort of explained this way in the past, and I think it describes with simple elegance the two distinct parts that I want to share with you. Where primary pain is the pain you feel in your physical self and the issues with the tissues, a ligament torn, ruptured tendon, broken bone, whereas the secondary pain is the emotional cascade, behaviors and beliefs that comes as a result of the chronic pain. I recently came upon an article written by Vidimala Birch, and she summarized the concept of primary and secondary pain so eloquently, I just had to share. And she says, primary suffering is any unpleasant physical sensations you may experience as a consequence of illness, injury, fatigue, etc. The secondary suffering is the human anguish we all experience as a reaction to primary suffering. Feelings like anger, fear, depression, anxiety, and despair that we instinctively pile on top of any unpleasant sensation or event in a dense web of reactivity. Over time, this is number 3. Over time, chronic pain changes the structure of the brain, as does so many of life's experiences. And this is due to the fact that our brain is always adapting. As humans, we are extremely adaptable. In psychology, it's known as neuroplasticity, or as the pain community is starting to call it, and I love this, bioplasticity. So it's not just the neurological side. Yes, your brain is very adaptable, but so too are the rest of your tissues throughout your biology. So it might just be this bioplasticity is your new best friend. That is the sense of hope that's coming through in the research with chronic pain. So does it mean with this change that our brains are changed forever? Good news is absolutely not. As humans, we are extremely adaptable, and that includes our brains and our bodies. And as the brain adapted to years of pain behaviors such as avoidance, catastrophizing, and so too can adapt to healthy behaviors. It just takes time, effort, guidance, persistence, patience, and a really good pain coach. I had to slide that in there. So number 4, the brain learns pain over time and becomes really good at pain behaviors and pain talk. Think of something that you have practiced over and over and over again, and you've gotten really good at. So for example, playing the piano or learning to walk or learning how to sign on to a webinar. Another example actually is just of your biology being adaptable is building calluses over time if you're working with your hands and they get a little bit rougher in the places that need protection. So we know that pain behaviors amplify anxiety and or depression. So what are pain behaviors? Pain behaviors are a specific form of illness behavior, which are in large part learned or conditioned or reinforced by past pain experiences. So here are some examples. Avoidance, withdrawal from activities, fear, grief, frustration, wincing with the pain, an increase in focus on the pain, worry, isolation, all those things start to change your behavior. Your feelings are really strong at changing behaviors, and your feeling centers in the brain are highly impacted. Okay, number 5, sensitization. Not sure if you've heard this word before or not, but I'm going to describe it this way. Imagine you were in your backyard. It's a beautiful summer day. The wind is blowing, and behind you, you have a motion detector that goes off every time a blade of grass blows in the wind. Well, can you imagine how many times that light in the backyard is going to go off if it's blowing by every blade of grass and it's impacting that blade of grass? Well, that sensitization or that overreactivity or that hypervigilance is very much what your nervous system is doing when it's been living with chronic pain. So every time a blade of grass blows in the wind, you feel pain, or your sensitization is amplified. So anxiety is known to make those who suffer with chronic pain even more hypersensitive to pain. And when the pain becomes worse, the attention paid to the pain becomes even more intense, which in turn increases the overall amount of pain you feel. And number 6, as I mentioned earlier, the term chronic pain in of itself has a stigma and suggests long-term or a life of pain. With this diagnosis, you're already starting off with a sense of hopelessness. I touched on the word catastrophization earlier. Catastrophization is worrying excessively about the pain to the point that it's interfering with your life. There's a deep fear of making the pain worse or that a re-injury will occur, which cascades to fear of movement and then avoidance of activity in reaction to this fear. Number 8, self-blame and guilt at feeling anxious or depressed tends to amplify pain and anxiety or depression. Number 9, past trauma will have a devastating impact on your physical and your emotional pain. It is often not acknowledged as impacting pain, nor is it addressed in chronic pain care. If you've experienced trauma and it comes in many forms, sometimes in micro doses, chances are it is affecting both your emotional and physical self, and thus needs to be treated as the whole of you. And if you have lived through trauma, and if you're not dealing with it, but you're trying really hard to deal with your chronic pain, unfortunately, the chronic pain will persist until we can start to address that unresolved trauma. Now let's tap into the biological side of things. I'm going to keep this relatively simple today by focusing on just 2 aspects of the biological that often get missed when talking about mental health. We already spend plenty of time in the biological aspect of pain with a multitude of appointments and trying to find solutions to get rid of the pain, imaging, testing, all that stuff. Instead, we're going to address 2 things that you can start to explore on your own and with the help of your healthcare team. Increased stress often mean increases in vitamin and mineral deficiencies. For example, the body goes through magnesium much faster while under stress. And we all know that there is no stress with chronic pain, right? Yeah. Magnesium is considered a softening mineral, and it's an important part of a healing sleep. So calming your nervous system and helping to reduce stress and anxiety. So if you'd like to learn more about how magnesium impacts chronic pain, I also have a podcast episode dedicated to magnesium and chronic pain. The gut-brain connection. So the gastrointestinal tract is sensitive to emotion. Anger, anxiety, sadness, elation, all of these feelings and others can trigger symptoms in the gut. This connection goes both ways. A troubled intestine can send signals to the brain, just as a troubled brain can send signals to the gut. Therefore, a person's stomach or intestinal distress can be the cause or the product of anxiety, stress, or depression. And that's because the brain and the gastrointestinal system are intimately connected. Has your gut ever been affected by stress? Have you ever had the feeling of butterflies in your stomach or a gut feeling towards something? That is that strong connection between the gut and the brain. The gut and all of its beautiful bacteria, your gut biome is primarily made up of more bacteria than human cells, if you can believe it, It's considered your second brain, and it acts much like your brain does to regulate certain digestive processes in general, to communicate with the brain and the brain with the digestive system. The gut and the brain are intricately connected via the longest nerve in our body, the vagus nerve. And remember this nerve, as we'll come back to it in a little bit. So your gut biome is an integral part of your overall health and well-being and your emotional well-being, including our behaviors. All right, to demonstrate kind of the power of this sort of integration between your gut biome and your brain, there was a really cool experiment done relatively recently where they manipulated the gut biome of some mice. And they actually inhabited the mouse's gut with this certain type of bacteria. Once they added that bacteria to this mice population, they started noticing some really strange behaviors. Now, again, behaviors are an important part of the chronic pain experience. These mice actually lost their fear of cats. In fact, they became attracted to the cats, which is not very health sustaining for a mouse. So we have been rather unsupportive of our gut's microbiome for years through our Western diet, medications, overuse of antibiotics, and of course, stress. They all tend to chip away at the healthy environment we have living inside of us, of which we need to nurture, just as we do when we are pregnant, and we often think about what foods we are eating to support our baby bump. So too should we consider how we are feeding our gut biome. Serotonin is produced mostly in the gut, and serotonin is one of the hormones related to mood, happiness, calming, and sleep. Studies have shown that low levels of serotonin can lead to depression, anxiety, and sleep disturbances. So as you can see, if our gut biome is not vibrant and thriving, then we produce less serotonin, which in turn affects our moods, our sleep, and our ability to manage the pain. So if you're curious to know more, you can ask your doctor the following questions. Are my medications causing serotonin syndrome? If I am experiencing feelings of depression, are my serotonin levels too low? Or are my levels of serotonin affecting other aspects of my health? Now, earlier I kind of touched on the vagus nerve. We're going to talk a little bit more about that now. This nerve is the longest nerve in the body, like I mentioned, and it's the main contributor of the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, big word, but all you need to know is that that is responsible for the sort of combating that fight or flight or freeze response. The parasympathetic is known as the rest and digest system. It's a big hitter when it comes to calming the nervous system, reducing anxiety and depression, aiding digestion and emotional well-being. So understanding a little bit about the vagus nerve gives you a much more robust pain management toolbox. If you've ever heard of the polyvagal theory of pain management, then you know what I speak about. All right, in a few minutes, I'm going to give you 2 things you can do to tap into the power of your vagus nerve. Before we do that, we briefly discussed how chronic pain is impacted by our internal environment, but how does our external environment influence our pain and emotional health? Well, when it comes to chronic pain, so much to talk about. Our environment matters. Have you ever noticed that your pain goes up when you are under stress or after the loss of a friend or an argument with one of your coworkers, primary care providers, or a loved one? We can't always change our external environment, but the more aware of what triggers a stress response, the more we can adapt and change to it. Oh, there's my phone. Sorry. What can we do to help reduce anxiety and depression that often comes with chronic pain? So now that we know how anxiety and depression are often intricately linked with chronic pain, and that sometimes pain can worsen our sensations of anxiety and depression, what can we do about it? Okay, here are 10 things you can do on your own at home. Number 1, the medications, especially when you are really finding it difficult to regulate the emotions or when you're trying out a new skill set. Be sure that you are taking your medications regularly. I know that sounds like Captain Obvious, but if you're not taking your medications as prescribed, you're going to be lacking perhaps in motivation to be able to tackle the next part of the equation, which is number 2, exploring foods that will feed your healthy bacteria in your gut. So there, you may have heard about probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics. These are all to support your gut microbiome. And so there are certain foods that you can eat to really help bolster those good bacteria. And an example of foods are fibrous foods. Onions and garlic are fantastic for it. Asparagus, dandelion greens. Fermented foods are fantastic as well, such as yogurt or kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, pickles, believe it or not, kombucha. And then if you also pay attention to the foods that feed the bacteria, such as sugar, unfortunately, bacteria loves sugar. And then we're on to number 3. There are ways that you can stimulate your vagus nerve by body posture and the breath, which is really easy to do at home. For example, if you were to inhale for a count of 4 through the nose, just like you've heard so many times, and then you're going to hold that breath for 4 seconds, and then you're going to exhale for a count of 6. And you repeat this process for about 5 to 10 minutes to start, or less. Start with whatever you can. It is the easiest, most portable, anxiety-reducing act you can do. Okay. You can also stimulate your vagus nerve through certain body postures. And then you can couple that with your breathing as well. So for example, if you lie down on your back with your knees bent and your feet flat on the floor, place a pillow under your upper hips, okay, and low back. So you're lying down on your back with your head on the floor, your feet on the floor, and you prop a pillow up underneath your hips. And then you just start to breathe, just like we talked about. Inhale through the nose for a count of 4, and then slowly exhale for a count of 6. And just by being in that propped up position, you're already kind of tapping into that powerful vagus nerve. You can also tap into your internal drug supply. We are able to release powerful chemicals and neurotransmitters through certain activities, emotions, and in the presence of loved ones. So your gut actually produces a whole lot of neurotransmitters. And so when we're not taking care of our gut, it does affect our emotions. Okay. So this again is a whole other topic of conversation, but it's important to at least mention. So you can tap into your own drug supply by doing things that make you happy and things that bring you joy, such as cooking, eating, in my case, savoring, connecting with friends, family, painting, being out in the forest, holding hands, watching a funny video. All these things tend to really amplify those good hormones, but also those chemicals that are going to help with mood. And of course, meaningful movement in its gentlest form increases the amount of happy hormones in our brain and our bodies. And first, we have to work through the fear associated with movement, step by step, so that you can confidently move to increase those endorphins. And number 6, pay attention. Paying attention to the words you hear yourself saying, either to others or to yourself, and then maybe write them down. Pay attention to pain behaviors and how often you feel their presence, and write them down. Pay attention to what makes your pain worse and what makes it better. Write them down. Pay attention to what triggers your anxiety or depression, and write them down. You might start to notice some patterns. Another move that is kind of easy to do for the majority of our population is something that they've proven is quite effective at descrambling the brain when it's feeling the pain. Now, it doesn't happen on the first attempt, but it will happen over time. If you keep repeating this movement, it's enough to sort of be able to bring that pain down a little bit. And simply put, it's just crossing your arm up above the head and across your center line, Okay, over and over and over again. And this repetitive motion here is going to help to descramble the brain. Even if you can't do it your own and someone can help you with that range of motion, it has been proven to help. However, if the shoulder is in so much pain due to an injury, a current injury, then you may not be able to get into that position. And that's okay. Something to work towards. Number 9, join a community of like-minded people who get it and who are also doing the work to change their relationship to pain. Number 10, of course, I have to say this, hire a pain coach. Why? Because a pain coach is going to help you to break down the overwhelm. A pain coach is going to help you set those attainable goals that are specific to you and your pain situation. And so to recap quickly, pain is multidimensional and includes the biological, the psychological, and the sociological aspects of life. Pain can make anxiety and depression worse and vice versa. When it comes to chronic pain, everything matters. Your environment, internally and externally, your lived experience, past experience, all contributes to your relationship to pain and your emotional health. Pain, as we mentioned before, is biopsychosocial in nature, which means it is biological and psychological and social in nature. And really importantly, pain is both physical and emotional 100% of the time. Okay, so now that you know all of this, is there any wonder why you are experiencing these deep feelings of anxiety, depression, and increased pain? It is important to understand that none of this is your fault, and chronic pain is real. It is complicated and messy, but it is possible to shift, to take back some control and live life alongside pain rather than underneath its crushing weight. I hope this video serves you well, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you for exploring more ways to mitigate your pain. Have a great day.